Hello, welcome students to the 8th and final lecture of the MEG 8 New Literatures in English, Block 2, A Grain of Wheat by Ngugi wa Thiong'o. I am Dr. Madhumita Chakraborty, Associate Professor, Department of English, Zakir Hussain Delhi College Evening, University of Delhi. So, in the previous 7 lectures, we have we've discussed the novel, we've discussed colonialism, we've discussed a lot of things. But right now, I want to focus on what are the major themes that we have in this novel. Here, I've listed out the major themes that we have: colonialism, racism, the role of the individual in society, the theme of betrayal, guilt, and redemption, the theme of religion, and the theme of gender. In this lecture, I'm going to deal with each of these themes one by one before my concluding remarks on the novel and on this text. So, how is colonialism a major theme in this novel? We know that this novel is set in the backdrop of the Mau Mau revolt. We know it is set in the backdrop of the impending Uhuru celebrations in Kenya. Therefore, A Grain of Wheat naturally has colonialism as one of its major themes. All the major characters, whether it is Mugo, whether it is Karanja, whether it is Gikonyo, whether it is Mumbi, they are all impacted by the colonial powers in some way or the other. On the other hand, characters like Thompson become the symbols of colonial atrocity and a desire of the colonizers to let prevailing status quo continue even after independence has been achieved. Ngugi uses both the context and the development of his characters to explore not just the actual issue of colonization, but also the moral aspect of colonization from both the perspective of the British as well as the rural Kenyans. He argues that although both colonizer and colonized feel that they are in the right, ultimately colonialism is subjugative. Ultimately, colonialism is oppressive, and hence the colonized subjects have every right to fight for their freedom, their voice, their agency, their independence, their identity, even if they have to use violent means to achieve their ends. The novel ends on the day of Kenya's independence from Britain. It resolves the conflict, therefore, between the colonizer and the colonized. Even so, since the author observes that Britain remains imperialistic, the moral argument against any such colonization by any country remains firm. So we see how colonization is, it seeps through the book. I mean, with all the repeated mention about the Uhuru celebrations, Mugo's repeated refusal to be a part of the celebrations, the way we talk about, what happens at the research station, what happens with the scientists at the research station, everywhere. There is, we see how the impact of colonialism is felt at various levels, and linked to colonialism is the issue of racism. Racism is seen primarily through the action of the white colonial masters. We see in this novel how during the emergency, the British forces, the Home Guards working for the British forces, how they commit a number of atrocities and a number of crimes. With the example of Mugo, we have seen how detainees are abused physically, mentally, sexually. The horrific story of the execution of the poor deaf boy Gitongo, to be distinguished from Gikonyo, is one such example. We've also seen how when the colonized are tortured, the different ways in which they react to it. Characters like Mugo refuse to confess their oath. Characters like Gikonyo want to be free, and therefore they confess their oath, even though they do regret it later. Through the British administrators, we observe the dehumanizing view of the blacks held by them. The idea of civilizing the savages, which we discussed about in the first lectures, was indeed ingrained in the minds of the colonizers, and the feeling of inferiority was internalized in the minds of the locals. Characters like Dio Robson, John Thompson, they embody the racism that we see in the novel. Thompson cannot even distinguish two black men one from another. He is surprised to see them discussing so-called high arts like literature. He starts his career wanting to be humane, but soon he is not hesitant to physically abuse his detainees. His wife, Mrs. Thompson, sees the Kenyan men around her as objects for her sexual gratification and is very unhappy to learn that they have minds and thoughts of their own. Dr. Lind, whose patronizing and degrading treatment of the village residents stems from her paranoia and her inability to see the residents as anything other than potential threats. Although the novel chronicles Kenya's independence, Thompson's belief that the country will never be free from European interference, even as he is packing to leave, introduces an ominous note into an otherwise happy ending. All these themes that we see in the novel, all of them are actually also bound together within one larger theme, which is the individual and society. Mugo and Kihika, these are the two characters who epitomize the distinction between the individual and the society. Mugo is individualistic. He wishes to be left alone. He does not wish to participate in the Uhuru celebrations, albeit for very different reasons. On the other hand, Kihika is the self-sacrificing hero of society, a man who did not hesitate to even give up his life for the larger cause. He is the Christ figure, the grain of wheat, symbolized by the title of the novel. Another character who is concerned only with personal self-aggrandizement is Karanja. He is willing to betray, he is willing to sell out his countrymen for a higher standing with the British authorities. His desire to elevate his own position in society often puts him in conflict with his own people, as seen when he became a chief in the Home Guards, and later when the people of Thabai are quick to denounce him as a traitor. As he then says, every man in the world is alone and fights alone to live. Kihika joins the Mau Mau fighters to rid Kenya of white occupiers. He kills Dio Robson to stop this man's reign of terror, despite the fact that that makes Kihika a wanted man. Kihika, in contrast to Mugo, in contrast to Karanja, understands and accepts his social responsibility to his community, even though it costs him his life. He demonstrates that to take responsibility for the people around oneself often requires great sacrifice of the individual. So for the larger cause of the society, Kihika sacrifices himself. His selflessness, his courage to fight the British makes Kihika a hero. It makes Kihika a symbol of hope for his people. All Kihika wants is a simple, happy, unburdened life. This makes him the most admirable figure in the novel and demonstrates the virtue of shouldering the burden of one's duty to their community. Mumbi also acts primarily for the good of others. Even when she sleeps with Karanja, she does it out of gratitude for his help towards her. She decides not to reveal Mugo's betrayal of Kihika to preserve peace, even though Kihika is Mumbi's brother. She also wants Karanja to stay away from the celebration, knowing what lies in store for him if he turns up. The next theme that we see here is of betrayal, guilt, and redemption. Who are the characters who carry these guilts on them? Obviously, the major characters who carry the burden of guilt with them are Mugo and Gikonyo. Both of them carry the burden of guilt for secret crimes over the years. This mentally torments them. Ultimately, they find relief and redemption when they willingly admit to their mistakes and face the consequences. Through Mugo's and Gikonyu's respective journeys, a grain of wheat argues that redemption and freedom from guilt can only be gained by open confession and the willingness to face the consequences of one's actions. Both Mugo and Gikonyo are mentally tormented by the burden of their guilt, demonstrating the excruciating burden that hidden guilt becomes. So Mugo is burdened by his betrayal of the village Hirokihika. This is exacerbated when he is considered as a hero and requested to take the lead in the Uhuru celebrations. As the novel progresses, he is increasingly burdened and tortured by this guilt. His admission of this guilt brings him mental peace. The village's response to Mugo's confession perfectly illustrates that redemption can come with admitting and owning one's guilt. Unlike the public hanging that had been planned for Karanja for the same crime, Mugo is taken away to be tried and then perhaps to be executed in private. The fact that he is not getting this public execution like Karanja also is a sign of how highly the villagers hold him, and it demonstrates Mugo's redemption in the eyes of his village. Gikonyo also follows a similar path. His guilt stems from his breaking of the oath in the detention camp, when he confesses his oath in return for freedom, when he confesses that he was a part of the resistance movement to the authorities. He hopes that he will receive favorable treatment as a result and perhaps even be released, but that does not happen till much later. Unlike Mugo, Gikonyo is not entirely relieved from his burden of guilt because he does not confess his betrayal to his community. Mumbi also suffers from guilt. What is her guilt? We know that she gave in to Karanja's advances, that the fact that she slept with him, leading to her pregnancy by him. It is at the end of the novel, when Gikonyo and she reconcile and decide to give their marriage another chance, that we can see some redemption in her. The next major theme that the novel deals with is that of religion. Christianity, which is of course the religion of the colonizers, occupies a complicated position, we can say, in this novel, because not just the British, but also the Gikuyu utilize various aspects of the religion. For many Kenyans, it's alternatively a source of hope and also a source of their subjugation and the invasion of the white man. Throughout the novel and throughout the narrative, Ngugi's depiction of Christianity suggests that it plays a complex role in Gikuyu culture, sometimes acting as a tool of Western colonialism. When integrated with traditional beliefs, sometimes it as a profound source of meaning and revolutionary spirit. As it did in most of the colonized countries, Christianity comes to Kenya with the colonial invasion as a tool of their subjugation in the guise of enlightenment. The first white people who come to Kenya are the missionaries, who gradually win the trust of several Kenyan tribes. We've discussed this in earlier lectures. As the influence of Christianity grows, however, Kenyan converts begin rejecting their ancestral beliefs, treading on sacred places to show that no harm could reach those protected by the hand of the Lord. As the authority of the missionaries grows, people, and I quote, people saw the white man had imperceptibly acquired more land to meet the growing needs of his position, end quote. And before the local leaders can protest, more white men have arrived, carrying not the Bible, but the sword. Thus, Christianity is now revealed not as a tool for salvation, but for invasion and colonization. We know that the major way in which the white man exerted their dominance over the colonized was through land. And land was the major resource that the natives had. Gradually, as the white man took up more and more and more land, the natives were sent more and more to the margins of society. So, in their own country, they became marginalized from a position of centrality that they used to have at one point in time. Reverend Jackson, a Kenyan minister, argues, and I quote, Nigai, the Gikuyu God, is the same one God who sent Christ, end quote. The wisdom that Reverend Jackson derives from the Bible, while still maintaining Gikuyu ancestral beliefs, makes him a sought after council member by the Gikuyu village elders, demonstrating how Gikuyu traditional beliefs and Christianity may complement each other, may coexist together rather than override each other. But even he ultimately denounces this position in favor of a more orthodox Christian position. As a result, he is seen as a traitor to his country and he is executed by the Mau Mau. Kihika becomes obsessed with the biblical story of Moses and the Exodus, seeing it as a natural parallel to Kenya's oppression at the hands of the British. Kihika sees a parallel in himself with the figure of Christ, as a leader, as a self sacrificial figure. He, in fact, becomes the Christ figure for the entire village in their struggle for freedom. Christianity becomes a vessel of meaning for the revolutionary spirit of the Gikuyu people and the Mau Mau fighters, lending its stories to help them understand their own plight. The fact that Christianity can be both a tool of oppression or a fuel of liberation suggests that it is dynamic, capable of being utilized for many different and even opposing purposes. We must remember that Grain of Wheat was one of Ngugi wa Thiong'o's early novels. As he went on in his career, Ngugi would eventually go on to reject all Christian teaching as undue Western influence. But his depiction of Christianity in A Grain of Wheat depicts it as a complex, dynamic influence, fueling both the rejection of traditional beliefs in favor of Western ideals, as well as the fight to preserve traditional Gikuyu beliefs and throw off Western oppression. And finally, one of the last major themes of this novel is gender. Although women are socially disempowered in Gikuyu society, Ngugi's depiction of his female characters argues that they are just as strong as the men and often stronger. As in most societies, women occupy a lower rung in the social ladder, and the black women are doubly marginalized. Hence, Mrs. Thompson, using African men to satisfy her sexual cravings, is probably more justifiable in many ways in terms of the social hierarchies than Mumbi's one of sex with Karanja. Polygamy is accepted in African society. Gikonyo's father, for example, had many wives. And once he got tired of one wife, he would just discard them. The same happened with Gikonyo's mother. Once he got tired of her, he simply forced her to leave his home. This poor woman, therefore, now has no home and no husband. She is doomed to a life of hardship, of struggle. However, we see in the novel how Gikonyo's mother shows her fortitude in bringing him up, despite all this hardship. Also, unlike the men in Gikuyu society who have the right to cast off their wives whenever they please, the wives don't have the same freedom. After Gikonyo meets his wife Mumbi, she leaves him and returns to her parents' home. When she does so, her own father shames her for defying Gikuyu, saying, and I quote, "In our time, a woman could take blow and blow from her husband without a thought of running back to her parents." This deference to an abusive husband over the safety of his daughter demonstrates that Gikuyu society possesses much of the same gender inequality as British society or any other society in that era, where women are socially, culturally, and politically disempowered. Yet the Gikuyu also remember when they were ruled by women, proving that there is nothing inherently weaker about their women than their men. In fact, Gikuyu society was once dominated by warrior women who kept the men in subjugation to serve their whims and needs. The men gained their revenge by making these warrior women pregnant and taking advantage of this situation to become the powerful ones in society. When the British missionaries arrive and tell the Gikuyu about their English queen, this idea of the matriarch, the concept of the matriarch, resonates with them because they see the parallels with their own history. And aside from Kihika, nearly every male character in the story is crippled by either cowardice or indecision or both. For example, as a prisoner in the detention camps, Gikonyo caves to the pressure and confesses to being a freedom fighter, spending the entire novel living in shame and unable to even admit his own cowardice, following the line of least resistance. Karanja betrays his country and works for the white man, presenting the image of power and confidence before his countrymen, but secretly cowering in fear of any white person, unable to approach them or speak his mind. Even the ruthless John Thompson is revealed to be a coward, unable to make decisions under pressure, such as when he witnesses a dog attack one of his employees, but he cannot summon the willpower to stop it or admit his own weakness to his wife and to his colleagues. In contrast, the female characters often demonstrate a lot of strength. When most of Thabai's men are fighting with the Mau Mau in the jungles or imprisoned in the detention camps, characters like Mumbi and her mother-in-law have to put on the trousers, become the men, and set about rebuilding new homes for themselves. Nijeri, a woman who is in love with Kihika, follows him into the forest and wages war on the British till she is killed. Wambui, an old Gikuyu woman, is perhaps the most powerful female character. She smuggles messages and weapons beneath her dress to aid the Mau Mau. During a political meeting, Wambui climbs onto the stage, grabs the microphone from the male speaker, and declares that their success thus far has been due to the work of the Gikuyu women, not men, and therefore the men ought to, and I quote, come forward, wear the women's skirts and aprons, and give up their trousers to the women. Wambui and the other female characters display a strength of character which depicts a legacy of powerful Gikuyu women who, though socially disadvantaged, nevertheless demonstrate incredible strength and capacity. Ngugi wa Thiong'o's glowing portrayal of the women in his country suggests that, like Wambui, the author completely, and I quote, believes in the power of women to influence events, especially where men had failed to act or seemed indecisive, end quote. Despite their lower standing in Gikuyu society, the women are revealed as a force to be reckoned with and a major contributor to the Kenyan independence movement. Now, I'd like to discuss, just before ending, a couple of important symbols and motifs that we see in this novel. The first is that of the train, also called the Iron Snake. This train or Iron Snake represents British progress, technology, as the empire establishes its colony in Kenya. More specifically, it represents how technology is perceived by the Gikuyu people. When the train first comes, it is a technological marvel to the Gikuyu. It is also a machine that brings both soldiers as well as administrators. On first sighting, the Gikuyu are terrified of the train. They call it an iron snake. They envision it as an actual monster, quote, wriggling its way towards Nairobi for a thorough exploitation of hinterland, end quote. Over a period of time, the train becomes a point of interest to Gikuyu, to the people. And Thabai's train platform even becomes a social center where the young people gather each day to watch the train cross. As the resistance grows, the train also becomes a symbol of colonial power. The final scene of the novel, where Karanja sees the train leaving without him, is hugely symbolic. As a character who derived his power from the white masters, he is now alone in the darkness, symbolizing the last vestiges of his power departing with the train, leaving him behind with nothing at all and no one to talk to and no one to turn to. Yet, it can also be the start of a fresh new beginning for him, a movement from the darkness to light. The second symbol is that of the title, A Grain of Wheat, and linked to it, the Bible. The grain of wheat is the seed of rebellion, first planted by Vayaki, whose blood was spilled during an earlier conflict with the British. These seeds sprout with Kihika, who underlines the passage in his Bible from St. John chapter 12, verse 24, quoting, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. But if it die, it bringeth forth much fruit." End quote. Kihika himself is connected with the grain of wheat, and through his revolutionary activities and his ultimate sacrifice in killing Robson and dying for this action, he can be seen as a physical manifestation of the symbol of the grain of wheat in the story. Kihika is a devoutly religious person. He is the Christ figure in the novel. He is betrayed by his close aide Mugo, just as Jesus was betrayed by Judas. He carries his Bible wherever he goes, but ironically is not carrying it with him when he is captured. With that, we come to the end of our module. Over the last 8 lectures, we have covered a number of issues, from the beginnings of colonialism in Africa, and then specifically Kenya, the evolution of the resistance movement in Kenya. We have covered the emergence of modern African literature, the relationship that exists between literature and society and literature and politics. As Gugi says, every writer is a writer in politics. The only question is what and whose politics. We have discussed the life and career of Ngugi wa Thiong'o in detail. We have observed how his writings have been deeply influenced by his life and his personal convictions. And in the last 4 lectures, we have specifically focused on the text, undertaking a detailed critical analysis of the same. I hope you have enjoyed these lectures. Thank you.